In part one, I pictured our reality as being a split world, and by that I mean the surface of reality, our ordinary world of the senses or phenomenal reality, the empirical world, is now split from the background of reality, that aspect of the reality that supports and informs our surface reality. That's the condition that we're living in today. And so those people who break through to the background of reality, or for whom the background breaks through into their surface reality, certain complexities and problems exist that did not exist in the past. For example, with Merlin, as I told you, the issue was more of a letting go, a surrendering, and the surface would just yield to the background quite easily. So the first person that I want to speak to you today about is C.G. Jung, and I want to read you a passage from Memories, Dreams and Reflections that shows what he experienced when he broke through to the background of modern reality. An incessant stream of fantasies had been released, and I did my best not to lose my head, but to find some way to understand these strange things. I stood helpless before an alien world. Everything in it seemed difficult and incomprehensible. I was living in a constant state of tension. Often I felt as if gigantic blocks of stone were tumbling down upon me. One thunderstorm followed another. My enduring these storms was a question of brute strength. Others have been shattered by them, Nietzsche, Hölderlin, and many others. But there was a demonic strength in me, and from the beginning there was no doubt in my mind that I must find the meaning of what I was experiencing in these fantasies. When I endured these assaults of the unconscious, I had an unswerving conviction that I was obeying a higher will, and that feeling continued to uphold me until I had mastered the task. After many years, Jung did master the task and produced a book which we now have published for us in 2009. It's called The Red Book, or Liber Novus, and it is a record of his journey into the background of reality, what he calls the unconscious. And we can see from some of the pictures which I will show you the strange alien nature of that background. This is not a simple situation of surrender, letting go, collapsing, as happened with Merlin and Parmenides. This involves a matter of the will. As the Memories, Dreams, Reflections reports, Jung willed his way into the background, and throughout the Red Book too we can see that from start to finish there is an exercise of will involved that just did not obtain in the past whatsoever. The second thing to notice is his experience of the background as being utterly alien to anything he knew before. Now this is a result of the background and surface reality being split from one another, having been so for a couple of centuries now. And so anyone who makes it through to the background, or for whom the background penetrates into the surface, that's one of the characteristic experiences of encountering alien contents. In fact, psychiatry in the 19th, early 20th century psychiatrists were called alienists. We can also see that Jung struggled, from the quote I read, to find the meaning of what he had entered, and how to bring that back too was a topic that occupied him for his entire life. For example, he was never sure whether he should publish the Red Book or not, because the contents were so strange and alien, and he struggled with that problem for his entire life. He devoted his work also to developing his theories as another way of bringing forward the new message, so to speak. These paintings that I'm showing you are in the Red Book, and they certainly give that characteristic of being alien and not part of our familiar world whatsoever. And as I said in the past, that was not the case. For example, with Merlin, the mythic herdsman was a figure who looked like nature, only much more awe-inspiring, forbidding, and grand. But Jung did make it back from his journey into the background of reality. It took many years. and he did write the Red Book, and that Red Book is now a record for us. But as to what kind of book it is, that has occupied him during his entire life, which is why he had serious doubts about whether he should publish it, and also the doubts of subsequent scholars. The question was, what kind of book is this? Is it publishable at all? And that's due to the very strange structure of the book. If you look at it just as a piece of literature, it has some very, very strange qualities. And I want to draw one of those qualities out for you. These passages come from my book, which I'll show you here, Manifesting Possible Futures Towards a New Genre of Literature. In this book, I examine Jung's Red Book more closely, particularly its structure as a piece of literature. We can get to the strangeness of the Red Book as a piece of literature by comparing its structure to, say, Alice in Wonderland. Now, Alice simply, as we learned later, fell asleep, and then she went down the rabbit hole and entered the Wonderland. But the way she entered it is crucial, that she entered it as a fictional character herself. She could grow small, she could grow tall, she engaged with these characters that were purely fictional and took them on very seriously in their own terms. Now that's a fairly common structure where fictional reality and empirical reality are kept apart and devices are used such as I fell asleep and I dreamed, or I went down the rabbit hole. A clear indication that we're now moving from surface reality to background reality in a smooth way. Jung did not do that. This is where the Red Book is unique and where I think it's contributing to a new genre of literature. Jung entered fictional reality in his empirical ego. That's the critical point. He did not lose the empirical ego and go in as a character amongst other characters, taking them seriously. He entered in his empirical character. And I want to read you a passage which is quite compelling in this regard. Jung tells us at one point in the Red Book that he was confronted with a vision by a murdered child and a woman standing by, whose face is covered by a veil. To his horror, the woman demands that he eat the liver of the child, and he does so. And here is his description. I kneel down on the stone, cut off a piece of the liver, and put it in my mouth. My gorge rises, tears burst from my eyes, cold sweat covers my brow, a dull sweet taste of blood. I swallow with desperate efforts. It is impossible. Once again and once again I almost faint. Then it is done. The horror has been accomplished." End quote. Now, we are not here merely reading an imaginative account of what it would be like to eat the liver of a murdered little girl. We're not reading about a character amongst other characters here, like a cannibal. What we're reading instead is Jung in his empirical ego going into fictional reality and experiencing eating the liver of a little girl that way is in his empirical reality. We could say that while his reactions were empirical, he was physically experiencing these revulsion, the act itself was fictional. This is unheard of. In some way, empirical reality and fictional reality are uniting or coming together in a way that's unheard of. And this is the hint, I think, of the new form of literature that seems to be coming forward through the work of Jung in the Red Book and through the work of others too. So let's now turn to the second author, and his name is Philip K. Dick, who had experiences of, like Jung, being penetrated by the background aspect of reality and penetrating into the background aspect of reality over a period of many years. He wrote a book, or a book was published after his death, which records these experiences, and they're every bit as strange, alien, and difficult to understand as Jung's one. The posthumous book is called The Exegesis of Philip K. Dick, which is a book in which, like Jung, he tried to analyze and understand the experiences he had over a period of 8 years. His experiences began with an intrusion into his ordinary life by background reality and it had a similar character to my peacock experience. In March 1974, he was visited by a young woman who knocked on his door, and that meeting with this young woman had the similar character to the peacock, that a world was opened up to him, and he more or less dived into it for the next 8 years. I'll read you a section from Exegesis. Beyond 1974, he endured voices, visions, and prophetic dreams too numerous to list here, all to be enfolded by the writer into the cascade of interpretation of those earlier events, for example, of the young woman who visited him. End quote. Having penetrated into the background aspect of reality today, Dick, like Jung, brought back a new message, brought back new meaning that he tried to render in a new art form, and that was his books. He was a very well-known science fiction writer in the United States, and his books, including the posthumous book Exegesis, had the character of strangeness, unfamiliarity, and alienness that Jung's Red Book does when read by us today. Like Jung, he never gave up on the task of trying to make sense of and to communicate the new meaning that he had found. I'll just give you a passage that he spoke at a conference. I found it from the Android Prophet, uploaded to YouTube. He says, "We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this. Such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off." Now, this passage is one of the least difficult of Dick's, and Exegesis is filled with such passages. They're just extraordinarily hard to understand. Jung's Red Book has a very similar character, that the message they brought back, the new meaning they had found, was disturbing at a profound level, and I want to spend the rest of this talk trying to articulate to you what the difficulty is, what they had discovered, and what they are trying to bring back, and what they are trying to say in words that really belong to a form of consciousness that they had in fact transcended. What both writers had discovered by penetrating into the background of modern reality, and what made their writing so hard to articulate in our present vocabulary, is that they discovered not another category, not another form, but a breakdown in form, a breakdown in categories. Inner and outer, for example, collapsed. Past, present, and future collapsed. All the important categories like fiction and empirical reality collapsed, and they were both more or less in madness, and yet they had to bring something back to us, and what they brought back to us was best rendered in the Red Book and in Exegesis, but they cannot simply be understood in terms of those categories that in fact both writers had transcended. In Jung's work and in Dick's work, we're not dealing with another category, we're dealing with a breakdown in categories. So it's akin to madness, chaos, and in fact their works read that way at times. But in my view, there's something very, very important. It's not just mere madness that both authors were dealing with. They're dealing with a breakdown in categories, yes, and there is no name for that at present, but the literature that they brought forward, I believe, is the germ of a new category, and it's one that involves not a transcendence, but a unity of categories that just simply did not exist before. We can see art forms that try to be faithful to Dick's work. For example, as I told you, he's a very well-known science fiction writer, and The Minority Report, for example, and Blade Runner. But also there are other movies too that are trying to deal with the same material, and I can think of Terminator being one, where past, present and future are mingled in a way that defies understanding in terms of our present consciousness. Several of my own books try to get at this material and spell it out a little more, and they are based on not only Dick's experience and Jung's experience, but my own as well, which spanned a period of 15 to 20 years. And here are the titles of the books. And in these books, I am trying to spell out or articulate what I think are the seeds of a new genre of literature, one that has no name yet, but it's one that is faithful to the phenomenon. That is, it is faithful to the background aspect of reality that we find behind appearances today, and must come forward in that form. But it does look chaotic, it does look mad, but there is a profound sanity in it as well. This is the point that Dick makes explicitly in his book Valis, where he says that staying in the madness long enough brings one around to the following stunning revelation, that what is rational and what's irrational gets completely reversed. So it turns out that our present world of our stable positivistic consciousness is insane, and what Dick broke through to is in fact sanity, trying to break into our modern insanity. This is completely in accord with my own experiences that I record in my own books, but it is a mind-bending proposition. Yet this new genre of literature can have that effect on one if one stays in the chaos and madness long enough. The polarity of rational-irrational gets reversed, and in fact you can start to feel cured in the strangest way. I myself had this experience, and Dick did, and Jung did as well. What it means is that this new form of literature brought forward by Jung and also by Dick is that our present form of consciousness has become so isolated that it is structurally psychotic. And as we know with psychosis, the psychotic person thinks of themselves as being perfectly sane. Our present structure of consciousness, in its state of isolation from just about everything, thinks of itself still as sane. Now, by reading this literature, one can dive into madness and feel that all the categories are going. The outcome, if you stay in it long enough, as Dick found and as Jung found, is that one is cured of this isolation. Now, this is a very peculiar outcome, but this, I believe, is the healing function of this new form of literature that is just in the making. Many individuals are stumbling into this area, I think, but it does represent a new form of consciousness, a new reality that ends the isolation that ever since existentialism we have come to know about and to bemoan or despair. This form of literature, which has no name yet, appears to be, in my view, the cure. Now, my books that I showed you the covers of, and which I'll show you again here, are my own attempt to both speak about this literature and to express it. I've written some forms of my writing have this character as well, and they're there for you to read and to consider. These two talks can merely be a very brief introduction to what is a profound yet almost incomprehensible topic to approach, but I'm hoping that through the examples of Jung, Dick, and my own writing, that you may get a little closer to it and may be curious enough to take it a little further. And I'd be very happy to do that with you in any sort of discussion that you'd care to have. It's something that needs a community of people to join in with, I think. Take care.